Chapter 29 is called Bayan's Gift. Almost without sleep, we again rushed across Gobi, hill and valley, like a great gust of wind. When, at an arrow station, Adja peered closely into what must have been my very pale face, he ordered me to stay behind and rest. But fiercely I clutched the saddle with both hands and refused to step down. So he knotted a rope around my waist, also tying my feet into the stirrups. We thundered on along the ancient caravan route, my head nodding beneath one burning sun after another. I knew not the day. I knew not even if I slept or if I lived this exhausting dream. As the horses' hooves clattered upon the arching stone bridge that Bayan, Bader, and I had timidly crossed almost a year ago, the Khan's sentries immediately directed us to him, waiting with his herd of white mares. The sight before my glazed eyes was worse than any that had haunted my sleep. Stiff-legged white bodies, like the oversized toys of children, lay toppled all across the green hills. Teams of men and oxen dragged the carcasses through the grass to a long black ditch that was being filled as fast as it was being dug. It looked as if the skin of the earth itself gaped with an open wound, and that the men worked to stuff it with pieces of white bandage. Looking around, I saw that less than half of the herd remained standing. I feared we had returned too late. My eyes searched for the grasses for Bayan while the shamans crowded around us. One by one, we dropped the sacks, thudding to the ground. The shamans fell upon them, picking through their contents like crows. Cackling and calling to each other in strange tongues, they turned the roots over and over in their hands. I could tell that the men recognized the root, for several of them immediately referred to it as gankao, or licorice. Kubla Khan stood among the robed men, leaning upon a servant and looking more tired than I had ever remembered seeing him. He spoke with his advisors, asking of the root's healing abilities. After the briefest of discussions, the Khan shouted an order to administer the cure quickly to those of his mares that yet lived. Ekinkorlo's brown roots were hastily pounded into a powder. Then small amounts were mixed into wide wooden bowls, holding moistened grain. Most of the mares nibbled at the mixture, but those that were too stiff to move had their lips pulled wide and handfuls of the medicinal blend pushed down their throats. A call had gone out, and already people from the city were arriving to dump their own small pieces of licorice root into waiting baskets. A group of women knowledgeable about the area's plants offered to scour the hills and valleys for more ganko plants. With treatment of the mares well underway, I stumbled through the crowd to the Khan's side. He flinched when he saw me, then abruptly looked away. For what seemed like a great while, he loudly directed the life-saving efforts of the shamans. I was horribly afraid of the answer to my question, but I had to know. Tugging at the Khan's silken sleeve, interrupting him, I asked, "Bayan, is she—" The Khan turned his sad, dark eyes upon me. "O Yuna, my dear," he began, and I knew. He placed his hand lightly upon my shoulder as it began to tremble. "We tried so hard," I heard him say, "and your mare tried too, I think, for she clung to life long past the time we thought she would die." I could hold back my pain no longer. Tears poured down my face, and I crumpled to the ground in overwhelming misery. The long, back-breaking journey to the cave, the nightmarish return with the healing roots, none of this had been worth my effort, for Bayan was dead. All those days I was gone had been wasted. Days I should have spent at Bayan's side, I told myself. "Oh, Yuna, oh, Yuna." The great Kubla Khan was bending over my shoulder, speaking only to me. "I share your sorrow. To lose a life mate is almost to lose life itself." His voice choked upon his words. Then, clearing his throat with a string of coughs, the Khan brushed at his eyes and straightened. In a more regal tone, he announced, "I have had your mare buried upon my lands. It is what I wished, and I hoped you would agree." He paused, waiting for me to acknowledge his generous action. I stopped sobbing long enough to look up into his face. "Would you like to visit the grave?" he asked. I nodded and somehow managed to climb to my feet. Stumbling at the swaying side of Kubla Khan, I was steered by his hand upon my shoulder across one of the grassy meadows to a spot where the riverbank was lined with drooping, long-leaved trees. By the very shape of their sagging limbs, these trees seemed to be weeping for my lost mare, my lost friend. Pushing our way through the pale green fronds, we arrived at a large mound of freshly turned black earth. I stared at it through swollen eyes brimming anew with tears. "I don't know why things happen the way they do, the Khan was saying, but I do believe that they happen for a reason. People will say that this mare we buried here never spoke to you, or that your long journey to our court was pure chance, a whim of your own making." The Khan limped toward the tree's gray trunk and leaned his weight against it. "But you heard her words, O Yuna, and you must always believe that. And I, who have also learned to listen with my heart, believe that you were sent to our court for a reason, to help my white mares. For this I thank you, and Bayan and that little tiger-striped cat of yours. He has a name too, does he not? Anyways, he has been a complete nuisance in your absence, and we have had to lock him in your room." A thought of Bader's antics made the Khan chuckle. Then he looked into my face with a tenderness that touched me. "There has been much sorrow in my life of late," he said, "and now there is sorrow in yours." He sighed. "Sometimes I miss Chabi so much that I wish my own life to end so that I may be united with her in the afterworld. But just when I am thinking about death, O Yuna, something happens that reminds me that life is not all sadness, and this time this gift comes from your mare." The Khan looked over his shoulder and nodded once. Turning back to me, he said, "I have told you that Bayan seemed to linger in half-death long after her time in this world had passed. It seemed to us that she was waiting for something. I thought it was for you. And that may be partially true, but she was waiting for another reason, to give you this." A rustling behind us, punctuated by a shrill whinny, made me look over my shoulder. Pushing through the fronds now was one of the stable boys, and prancing between his restraining arms was a long-legged filly the color of spring snow. I looked at the Khan in amazement. He nodded, smiling. It is Bayon's filly. We had to help her, and it took a long time, but we managed to pull the small creature from her just as the spirit left her body. He tipped his head and studied the lively orphan, who reared straight up between the boy's outspread arms. I rather guessed by the bold eyes and the long legs that the father resides in my imperial stud. Rightfully, then, I may lay claim to her, but I give her to you, O Una, to thank you. It was a lucky day when you rode into Khanbalik. A bittersweet salve was thus kneaded into my raw sorrow as I moved toward the bony foal. Taking her into my arms, I felt her heart rapidly pounding against my chest. A lucky day, the Khan had said. Perhaps. But with the help of Bayon, I had learned to make my own luck. Pink light of morning dusted the two white bodies. The larger one, the mare, stood with her head drooped lovingly over the smaller one, her filly, which slept in a heap at her feet. In the corner, the wrinkled-faced woman made a move to rise. Wait, grandmother, the girl cried, placing a hand upon the heavily robed arm. You are not finished. Cocking her head, the old woman settled back. What more do you wish to know, child? The girl's hand fluttered impatiently in the air. Everything, like what happened to the Khan's white mares, she stammered. Did they live? And what did you do? Did you stay in the palace? Did you go home? What about Bayon's filly? The old face creased in a patient smile. Most of Hubal Khan's white mares that were still living continued to do so. The powder roots seemed to chase away the sickness. As for me, well, I was not born in to live in the city. My heart was crying for the steppes. Did Adja go with you? Grinning, the woman nodded. Yes, as my husband, and Bayon's filly went, and thanks to the Khan's great generosity, 10 of his sacred white mares, ones of my own choosing. The shamans could not believe their eyes when I rode from the gates of Khanbalik, herding 10 royal mares and the loveliest of white fillies. A look of sorrow touched the girl's face. But you never got to ride the long race, did you? Oh, that's sad. With a knobby forefinger, the old woman teasingly thumped her granddaughter's head. You think it was not a long race to gallop from Khanbalik all the way to the Hente Mountains, then back? She shook her head and chuckled. Yes, I did get to race at Karakoram, although it was 4 years later, and I was pregnant with your mother. Chapter 30 is called The Festival Race. Adja and I did not have far to travel to Karakoram, since we were living with his people, the Naaman, just west of the famous city. But every bouncing step of that journey yet lies indented in my memory, for, with your mother growing in my belly, I was saddled with the early sickness. Curled upon the folded felt in the cart belt, I tried not to groan when each jolt splashed a new wave of nausea across me. Adja held the reins to the ox, but it was I who had to shout to urge the animal along, for my husband, having stamped his boot uselessly against this trip, sat stiff-jawed and silent. So he didn't want her to go, but he's taking her. When I'd first suspected my condition as being pregnant, I kept it a secret. The time was late summer, and Bayon's filly, which I had named Baltazoi, meaning steady joy, was maturing into peak form. While she possessed her mother's beauty, the exquisite creature remained small and fine of bone. Thus I had to be extra careful in toughening her legs. What would have taken a year or a year and a half with any other horse had taken twice that long with Baltazoi. The pounding race posed a risk to her bones, a double risk to my pregnancy, but, well, I was having dreams again, dreams of Bayon this time, and I knew we had to try. I promised myself I would tell Adja after the festival, but the sickness took a hold and I could not keep the news from him. Such arguing that followed. In the years since meeting and marrying at the Khan's palace, we had lived as if cut from the same cloth, never disagreeing. Now we traveled third in line of 4 carts from our ale, without speaking, so I hugged the warm body of my constant companion Badur, fatter now and inclined to long naps, to my queasy stomach, and thought about our last journey to Karakoram. It had been with my father. As then, I was approaching the festival with a mixture of hope and dread. This time, my hope was pinned on winning the long race, yet I somewhat dreaded the idea of seeing my father and Shura again. Oh, I wanted to see them, to let them know I was all right and very happy, but I worried that they would still be angry with me for riding off with the soldiers and not looking back. My fretting gnawed at my weakened stomach for 3 entire days before our ox came to a bellowing stop one noon outside Karakoram's walls. Only after Adja and I had set up our gear, and still with few words, brushed Baltazoi and tended the animals and made a pieced-together meal of the wonderful festival foods, did I hesitantly ask my husband to help me find my father. To my surprise, Adja threw himself into the quest, hoping, I began to think, to steer my resolve away from the race. Dropping the last chunk of a rule into Badur's waiting mouth, he immediately took my arm, and we set out through the crowds, asking this person and that one for the whereabouts of my ale. But there are many fish in the river, and they don't come when you call. The best we could do that first evening was tell any of the Karaite people that we met that I, Oyuna, would be riding a white mare in the long race, and to please pass the news to my father. Between my bouts of nausea, when I lay curled within our gear, Adja and I spent the next 2 days holding hands and letting ourselves be overwhelmed by the festival's riotously colorful sights and merry, though raucous noises. The night before the long race, as I laid out the new dell I had been saving for the event, my husband tried one more time to keep me from stepping into the saddle. "Oh, Una," he implored, pulling me to him, "please, you are the fire in my heart. How could I go on living without you? and feel, he said, placing his hand upon my still flat stomach, though it brushed placing his hand upon my still flat stomach, which already swelled expectantly. Our child blossoms inside you. Do not risk both your lives for a meaningless race. It's not meaningless, I argued for the 100th time in the past moon. But the Khan himself. I know, dear one, I said more gently, laying my palm upon the leathery cheek of my beloved Aja. Kublai Khan himself said on our parting that the race I ran, that we both ran, to my grandmother's burial cave, carried more luck to him than I could ever hope to find by winning the festival's long race. I understand that now, but the race tomorrow is no longer about winning luck. It's about closing the circle. Aja wrapped his arms around me and chuckled softly. Dreams again? I elbowed his ribs. Don't you laugh at my dreams. We saved the Khan's white mares thanks to such dreams. I know, he said, stroking my hair. Tell me about the circle. I pushed myself upright, staring intently into the cooking fire. The last time I was in Karakoram is when I met Bayan. I was looking for a swift horse, for I had already set my mind on someday winning the long race. And I chose Bayan, or she chose me. I shook my head, for I had never been clear on who had done the deciding. Of course, when I realized the weakness in her leg and the great many frosts that had passed over her back, I knew she would never carry me in the long race. But you see, I looked into Aja's eyes. Bayan was planning even then for me to win that race. We just had some other things to do first. And now I am back in Karakoram, full circle, and I have Bayan's filly with me. And Baltazoi is every bit the likeness of Bayan in her youth. Aja looked skeptical. I hurried on. In my dreams, I've been seeing Bayan, as she was when she was young. How do you know it is Bayan? Aja interrupted. I placed my fingers upon his lips. I just know, I answered. I see Bayan, slender and white and strong, galloping across the steppes, leading all the other horses in a wild dash. And then I see her in a festival race. I'm pretty sure it is Karakoram. And there is a boy upon her back, and they are speeding beneath the banners at the finish line. They have won. Transported to my dreams, I smiled. Then I caught the doubt in Aja's eyes. I don't know when all these things happened, I said defensively, but I know I am seeing Bayan, and I know that I did find my racing champion at Karakoram. Bayan had to carry me on a long, slow journey when I thought I was plagued by bad luck. And then, before she died, she gave me her foal that I could win the race we had set our hearts upon. And that's why we are here, Aja said. And that's why we are here, I repeated, to finish what we started, to close the circle. Hugging my knees, I stared into the fire. An ember glowed hot, briefly taking the form of a galloping horse, neck stretched into the wind before turning to white ash and falling away. I smiled once again. Confidence hardened within my bones, and when I lay beside Aja that night, I slept soundly. Before dawn, I was awake, the glowing green eyes of Bador blinking at me in the darkness. He knew the day, for he set aside his usual hungry wail to skitter madly around the gear, once ears pinned. A delirious yowl carried him past the door flap. The excitement stirred my sickness, and I had to concentrate very hard on not vomiting while I slipped into the new silk dell, the deep, dark red of a spring peony. A yawning Aja arose while I braided my hair into 2 short ropes. Without so much as a bowl of tea, then, we bolted from our gear to saddle Baltazoi. The young snow-white mare saw us coming and raised her neck to nicker a greeting, tremulous with emotion. She knew, too. Nervousness overcame me, and last night's confidence dropped away like so much ash. Coaxing the bit into Baltazoi's mouth, I felt dizzy, tingly, and frightened in rapid turn. I began fumbling with the saddle fastenings. Aja placed his large hand over mine, and I looked up into his smiling face, though I sensed he struggled to hide his concern. You'll do fine, he said in a husky voice, both of you. All 3 of us, I laughed, placing my hand upon my belly. Aja's smile fled. Please be careful, he murmured. I will, I promised. Aja moved to Baltazoi's head, fussing with the headstall and smoothing strands of her long white mane. From the corner of my eye, I saw him pull something out of his pocket and continue about his grooming. Carefully, I tucked away the end of the second girth strap and dropped the stirrup back into place. What are you doing? I asked. Aja didn't reply, only stepping aside and ducking his head sheepishly. Looking back, I saw that a lustrous silk tassel of sky blue dangled below Baltazoi's throat. At its clasp, cast in gold, twirled the small figure of a horse, legs extended in a ground-covering gallop. I know, Aja said. You make your own luck. But I brought us a little extra anyway. Grinning, he leaned over and kissed me lightly on the cheek. Ready? He asked. I fought back a strong wave of nausea and forced myself to match his grin. Ready, I answered. He cupped his hands at my knee, and I stepped into them, easily swinging my leg over Baltazoi's back. The familiar feel of the saddle, I had spent 1,000 days in its wooden seat, immediately soothed my nerves. With Aja at the stirrup, we moved toward the starting line outside Karakoram's north wall. In the coppery glow of dawn, I saw scores of other horses and riders moving in the same direction, the animals neighing excitedly to one another, the riders, for the most part, sitting grim-faced and quiet upon the bouncy backs. A cool breeze skipped across the steppes, ruffling the horses' manes and fingering through their thick tails. Whimsically, it rose into a crisp blast, smacking the horses across their noses in a taunt. As if linked, the animals sucked the wind's challenge into their blood as one. Its energy twitched through every hide. The powerful herd instinct grabbed hold, and iron bits sawed uselessly to contain it. Shoulder to shoulder, the horses began galloping, surging in a great wave toward the starting rope. Riders glanced uncertainly at one another, but something stronger than leather and iron and puny human arms had taken control. We gave in to the inevitable and bent over our mounts' necks as the mass gathered speed. I briefly noticed the starting man, mouth agape, drop the rope and scramble out of the way just as the first horses charged across the line. I gave Baltazoi her head, whooping loudly, and let the thrill wash over me as well. All the years of training and waiting and worrying and wondering were swept beneath Baltazoi's pounding hooves. We were here. I whooped again. Then, shaking clear my head, I settled low into the saddle and set my sights on the knot of horses ahead. We sprinted in a ragged group toward the first marker, defining the long, looping course, a fluttering white banner anchored in a stack of rocks. But before circling it, we had to get past a particularly tricky creek bed with steep slopes of slippery shale. I watched as one horse and rider after another disappeared into the ravine, counted fewer climbing out of it. The deep creek bed scared me, but I had learned to trust Baltazoi's instincts, as I had those of her mother, and when we thundered up to its lip, I hunkered down in the saddle, closed my eyes, and threw her the reins. I heard a loud grunt and a yelp as a horse and rider at our side painfully parted company upon the rocks. Pebbles kicked up by the fallen horse pelted my knee, but in a few heartbeats, Baltazoi was scrambling up the opposite bank, and we were otherwise unharmed. That first obstacle snatched its share of the racers. Although some horses continued galloping riderless, the pack was easily cut by a few dozen. After rounding the banner, the course straightened toward a distant, shallow pond, its rippled surface reflecting the golden light. A bold, sure-footed horse could save strides by carefully skirting the slimy shoreline, and that's where I and some 20 other riders nosed our mounts. The jostling for position grew ugly as riders kicked and elbowed one another. A few horses were pushed into the water and ankle-deep muck and thus slowed. Another caught a hoof in the sucking ooze and took a skidding nose-first fall, dumping his rider with a loud splat. I stayed just behind the main group, nimbly trying to steer a mud-spattered Baltazoi through and around the pock-marked shore. The middle of the course took us across a fairly flat area of the steppes, although one could never count out the possibility of stepping into a marmot hole and instantly snapping a leg. So certain was I that we were destined to run this race so that I didn't even squint at the ground ahead. I concentrated on pumping my hands against Baltazoi's neck, urging her to greater speed, and we began overtaking horses. A lone, scrubby tree, sprouting almost at the feet of the remote mountains, served as our next marker. Baltazoi and I galloped in the 5th position now, the majority of the pack strung out far behind. The racer immediately ahead of us was a rangy chestnut with a stride that ate up the ground. I watched his rump rising and falling for several leaps while I planned my strategy. Being so big, the horse, I guess, couldn't make the turn around the tree very tight, so when he and his rider galloped in a wide arc, I nudged Baltazoi to the inside and whipped around the tree so closely that I had to duck my head to avoid being pulled off by the branches. I heard the chestnut's rider shout angrily as we squirted past him, but Baltazoi dug her heels into the sod and sped off. A long gallop now until the next obstacle, yet another deep stream bed. So I settled Baltazoi in behind the 3 leaders. She felt to be galloping easily beneath me. Of course, her neck was darkened with sweat and dirty lather bubbled around the saddle front, but I knew this meant she was in good condition. As the stream's cleft began to grow more distinct, I tightened my fingers on the right rein to steer Baltazoi away from the others. You see, yesterday I had walked the course with my mare, studying where each hoof would fall. I knew where lay treacherous stretch of sharp rocks, every mucky grass-hidden bog. And I also knew that off to the right, the stream bed's steep banks narrowed just enough that a horse might clear them in a single leap. It was a gamble, to be sure, but I was hoping that jumping the cleft, even away from the straightest path, would be faster than slowing down to a scramble into and back out of the stream bed. Blocking out vivid images of splintered bones, I headed Baltazoi for the spot I had marked with 3 pale stones, urging her at every stride to hold steady and to make the effort. As if she read my mind, Baltazoi pricked her ears at the stones, and at just the right moment gathered herself, folded her front legs, and sprang into the air. For a heartbeat we were flying, my happiness in my mare soaring above us. The instant her front hooves hit solid and ground-grabbing, I looked aside. The others were yet in the ravine's bottom. I tightened my fingers on the left rein and shouted to Baltazoi. She pinned her ears and pounded faster. As we pulled into line with the last marker, a small hillock with another white banner waving atop it, Baltazoi and I were in the lead. I let a smile crease my face. Rising a peak over my shoulder, I saw that, while 2 horses threatened a few strides back, the third was tiring and rapidly falling behind. I lifted myself over the saddle's arching front to ease Baltazoi's climb. She lunged upward, bunched her muscles, and lunged again. As lightly as a gazelle, she bounded, and in the next instant it seemed we were atop the hillock and hurtling down the other side. Our appearance prompted a faint, far-off cheer. I looked up and, squinting into the morning sun, saw Karakoram again. We'd only one more stretch to gallop, but this, more than any other part, was the real test of the long race. While the sun had been rising, the racers had been tiring. Only the grittiest horse, the one who could dig down and shove the air beneath heavy hooves, Find another swallow of courage to keep driving would win now. The race was no longer about speed, it was about heart. Bending over the white neck, I called past the labored breathing, "You can do it. It's your race." And I swear to you that at that moment a mare's shrill whinny answered my call. It was sent from Bayon, for I would remember her voice forever. The tears that jumped from my eyes, I would later say they came from the wind whipping my cheeks, but the knot in my throat told otherwise. Half blind then, at the end, I crouched atop a speeding horse, clutching mane and flapping reins, and hoping we would thread the crowd and cross the finish line without knocking someone flat. We rushed toward the throng, or was it they that toward us? But all at once, people surrounded us, and I was trying to pull Baltazar to a stop, other hands reaching up to join mine on the reins. Suddenly limp, I more or less fell out of the saddle and threw my arms around Baltazar's sticky neck. Aja was at my side then, taking the reins from my hands and supporting my trembling body with his strong arms while smothering me with kisses. The men in the crowd hooted and the women clapped louder. Then a chuckle ripped through them as I tore away from my husband to throw my arms again around Baltazar's neck. Like her mother before her, she bent her sweet beaded head to affectionately nuzzle my shoulder with her lips. "Oh, Una?" A male's voice made it through the crowd's noise. "Oh, Una, is it you?" My father. I turned and stumbled into his outstretched arms, all of my questions and worries scattering in the wind. Looking up, I saw such pride in his eyes that a lump climbed again to my throat, bringing with it fresh tears. "This is my daughter," he called happily to the crowd. "She has won." That's the ending I wanted to hear. Smiling, the girl looked proudly upon the beautiful white foal that was just scrambling to her feet, testing wobbly legs. "Will my filly be swift?" "She is the great-grandmother of Baltazar, the great-great-granddaughter of Bayon. She should run, but I think there is more about her than speed." "What do you mean?" Ever so slightly, the old woman's head shook. The girl spoke bluntly. "Grandmother, are you a shamaness?" Dove-gray eyes, flecked with gold, turned upon her. A gentle smile lit the papery face. "I look and I listen, granddaughter. Does not everyone?" Then, cupping the girl's smooth chin in her calloused hands, the old woman turned the round face up toward her. One brown eye timidly stared back. The other strayed weakly aside. "I know others tease you because you are different, and no one understands your pain more than I." So it sounds like the little girl has eyes that don't quite track correctly. "But you cannot let their words fasten the notion of bad luck upon you." Tears brimmed over the brown eyes. The chin trembled. "Do you understand why your mother asked me here?" The young head nodded. "I have to make my own luck," came the whispered words. "Yes, dear one." The gnarled hands released the chin, pressed the head against a comforting shoulder. Tenderly, the old woman stroked the black hair of her granddaughter. "I will repeat to you what my grandmother Ekinkorlo told me. Listen with your heart instead of your ears, and always, always follow your own path." Suddenly the girl giggled. Ducking her head, she turned to find the inquisitive filly tickling her ear with long chin whiskers. Lightly she kissed the tiny muzzle, then laid her cheek against the moss soft skin. The filly nudged her playfully. A gasp jumped from the girl. "What is it, granddaughter?" the old woman asked calmly. The girl looked in awe to the wisely nodding face of her grandmother. The filly, she said she's ready." So I guess that means she's ready to have her baby, and she could hear her talking, right? That's a very good book. Very good book. It says the author, Diane Lee Wilson, has been in love with horses since the age of 3 when she was soundly kicked on the shin by a carnival pony. She spent her childhood, as many young people do, reading and dreaming about horses and riding as often as possible. While studying toward degrees in fine arts and English at the University of Iowa, she worked each summer as a professional stable in Texas, learning how to train and show horses. She now lives outside of San Diego, California. And that is the end. That was a really good book, everybody.